world and silence its suffering. Amid this blackout, access to emergency services was impossible. Humanitarian organizations struggled to coordinate relief efforts, and residents were left voiceless, unable to document the horrors they endured. Reconnect Gaza is more than just a campaign. It's a call to reclaim a fundamental right, the right to communicate.
اثبت مكانك، هنا عنوانك، ده الخوف بيخاف منك وضميرك عمره ما خانك. اثبت مكانك، ده نور الشمس راجع، يا تموت وانت واقف يا تعيش وانت راكع. اثبت مكانك، ده عينك شايفة الدليل، ابعد عنهم وسيب الحيط عليهم تميل. اثبت مكانك.
نشكر نديم الناشف على إدارته الجلسة، وأيضا نشكر جميع المتحدثين. أعزائي الحضور، الآن ندعوكم للاستماع إلى شهادة صادقة ومؤثرة قادمة من قلب غزة. نور سويركي صحفية فلسطينية شجاعة تشاركنا تجربة شخصية عميقة تجسد المعنى الحقيقي للانقطاع، ليس فقط كغياب للتواصل أو التكنولوجيا، بل كمعاناة إنسانية يومية يعيشها أهل غزة في صمت بعيداً عن أعين الناس. نور، أهلاً بك.
Thank you all for that informative session. Next, we invite you to listen to a heartfelt and powerful testimony from the heart of Gaza. Noor Swerki, a courageous Palestinian journalist, shares with us a deeply personal experience that embodies the true meaning of disconnection. It isn't just about the loss of communication or technology, but a struggle that all Palestinians in Gaza are forced to endure in silence, fully isolated from the rest of the world. Welcome.
شو يعني فقدان الاتصال؟ يعني خوف فوق الخوف، هيك احنا ممكن نوصفه في قطاع غزة. الفترة أكثر من مرة تعرض فيها قطاع غزة لانقطاع الاتصال. الأمر كان مرعب للناس. كيف ممكن يصير أي حدث ما يعرفوا معلومة عنه في حال فقدوا أي حد من أفراد عائلاتهم ما يعرفوا عنهم، ما يعرفون أماكن الخطر عشان ما يروحوا لها. كان ارتباط فقدان الاتصال بفقدان المعلومة، وهذا شيء كان مرعب للناس، إنهم منقطعين مش بس عن بعضهم، هم في نفس المنطقة الجغرافية، كمان منقطعين عن العالم. صار في سؤال، أنا مثلا كمواطنة قبل ما أكون صحفية صرت أسأل حالي، طب العالم عارف عنا ولا مش عارف؟ مش كلنا كصحفيين في هذاك الفترات اللي انقطعت فيها الاتصال كنا قادرين على تأدية مهامنا بتقديم المعلومات والإبلاغ عنها وشو اللي بصير وشو اللي ما بصير في القطاع. فقدان الاتصال هو خوف، هو تجربة صعبة على المستوى الإنساني، وبعتقد إسرائيل عندها هاي المعرفة بأهمية الاتصال، لذلك أكثر من مرة فقد الاتصال في قطاع غزة. وحتى اليوم هنالك إشكالية كبيرة في جودة الاتصالات في القطاع بعد تدمير معظم خطوط الاتصال والإنترنت. وطبعا هذا الأمر بيأثر بشكل كتير كبير على تقديم المعلومات، وكذلك على عملية الوصول للمعلومة والتأكد من دقتها ومن صحتها، وطبعا محاربة الأخبار الكاذبة المتعلقة بالواقع اللي منعيشه.
ينقص في سلاحف بحرية، يقتل حيوانات بشرية، تلك قضية وتلك قضية. كيف تكون ملاكا أبيض يبقى ضميرك نص ضمير، تنسف حركات الحرية وتنسف حركات التحرير، وتوزع عطفك وحنانك عالمقتول حسب الجنسية. وتلك قضية وتلك
نشكر نور على هذه الشهادة الحية. أما الآن جلستنا القادمة بعنوان الحق في المعرفة، الوصول إلى المعلومات في أوقات الأزمات، حيث نناقش كيف يؤثر التدمير المتعمد الذي تقوم به إسرائيل لبنية الاتصالات في غزة على الحق الأساسي في الوصول إلى المعلومات. تدير الجلسة المديرة التنفيذية لمشروع تور إيزابيلا فرنانديز، وينضم إليها في النقاش كل من الصحفية هند الخضري من غزة، المحللة والمحللة في معهد IMEU ديانا بطو، والأستاذ البروفيسور مارك أوين جونز في جامعة نورث ويسترن، أيضا رئيس قسم الشرق الأوسط في منظمة مراسلون بلا حدود الصحفي جوناثان داغر.
Thank you for that message, Noor. Our next session is on access to information in times of crises. It will look at how the right to access information is impacted by Israel's deliberate destruction of Gaza's telecommunications infrastructure. Today's session will be moderated by Isabella Fernandez, the Executive Director of the Tor Project. The speakers joining us for this session are Hind Qudari, a brave Palestinian journalist in Gaza, Diana Buttu, a lawyer and analyst for the Institute of Middle East Understanding, IMEU, Mark Owen Jones, an associate professor at Northwestern University, and Jonathan Dagger, a journalist and head of the Middle East desk at Reporters Without Borders. Welcome.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Isabella Fernandez and I'll be moderating this panel. We are now at almost 1.5 years of the genocide in Palestine. The telecommunications infrastructure in Gaza is completely destroyed. There is minimal access to the internet, which makes it really hard for information to get out of Gaza and for people in Palestine to communicate with each other and be able to have access to information about safe locations and humanitarian aid. Over 200 journalists have been killed so far. Despite all these difficulties and with a lot of courage, journalists in Gaza are managing to document the genocide and denounce it to the world. At today's panel, we will start by showing a video recorded by Hindi Hudari, a journalist from Gaza who has been covering the genocide for the past year and a half. Let's hear from Hindi first, and then we will move to our conversations with the panelists.
Hi, this is Hind, and I'm currently reporting from the Gaza Strip, and I started reporting since the first day of the war on the Gaza Strip. And one of the most harsh challenges we have been facing was the telecommunications blackout, where we literally spend days without knowing what's happening, completely disconnected from the world. And every time we hear an explosion, we heard a lot of live ammunition, we'd never know where this is because there has been a severe communication blackout. So you can't call anyone from your family, you can't call your friends, you simply can't call anyone. You don't have even the signal on your phone, and this was one of the hardest things we have been facing. I remember that my mother traveled from the Gaza Strip when I didn't know, because there was a telecommunication blackout during that period. So everything has been destroyed, the infrastructure has been destroyed, and it really affected every single journalist. So every time there was a telecommunication blackout, we managed to have eSIMs, and this was the only way we would connect to the world. I remember the first blackout, we had this eSIM that we did not know how to use, and this is how we were connected to the world. And I remember tweeting at that time, Israel disconnected Gaza from the world, and we were the only group of journalists that had internet at that time. And I started trying to publish videos and trying to tell everyone what was going on. It was a huge responsibility that I was one of the only journalists that had internet and was tweeting in the English language. As a Palestinian journalist, and especially covering this war every single day, there has been a lot of challenges. And one of the biggest challenges was the continuous attacks on Palestinian journalists. Earlier today, Hassan Slayh, one of the most prominent Palestinian local journalists, has been killed on his bed in the hospital where he was getting treated after an injury he sustained. And this is an example of how Israelis are targeting every single Palestinian journalist. We're talking about at least 200 journalists that have been attacked, and there has been a risk of every time you go in the field reporting. This has not been only reporting on the cause, but also living it. You are putting your life in risk. You're very scared to lose your family members. You're very scared to lose your friends. And this is what we are daily witnessing and facing across the Gaza Strip. Journalism has been so hard, and believe me, this area, this context had been the hardest. We have been living in this war for more than a year now, and it's not only living it, but it's also reporting it in endless evacuation orders, endless starvation, endless airstrikes, and it has been very, very hard to report this. The lack of access to information, the lack of access to people, the lack of access to the civil defense teams, to the ambulances, have been very challenging to not only journalists but also to Palestinians. I remember how people trapped under the rubble did not know how to reach the paramedics and civil defense teams because there has been no telecommunications and there has been blackouts. Every time the Israeli forces invaded a particular area, the first thing they would do is to cut all the communications. And this is just one of the examples where you really need an ambulance or you really need the civil defense teams and you are unable to reach them. Even journalists, if you want to report on something or if there was an explosion or an airstrike in an area, you are unable to know where this is, and it takes you time to go to that place and to see what's happening because there has been no connections. Palestinians have been struggling with this every single time. Do you imagine living for more than a year and a half without Wi-Fi? And it has been very hard for all Palestinians to connect with very small cards, to buy internet minutes. And this is the only way to try and to call their neighbors, to call their beloved ones, and to call their family members abroad. It has been very hard, and this is more of a routine now that there's no internet. Like, we do not have internet, and people are trying to use other methods, just like walking to a place, trying to reach a person that is close to that place. And we are back to the 90s and to the 80s when there was no telecommunications. I think the world has been trying to connect Gaza by sending eSIMs and by trying to help them find alternatives. But my only wish is for Palestinians to keep raising the voice of Palestinians, to keep posting about the Palestinians, because most of the times Palestinians do not have the internet to connect, do not know what's happening, even if they live in Gaza. Keep talking about Palestine, keep sharing stories from Palestine, and yeah, that's it.
I would like to thank Hindi for all her brave work and for recording this video for us. It's really important for us to hear from a journalist who is in Gaza and living this reality. Jonathan, I would like to get started with you. We are talking about the right to know, but how people will have access to information if journalists are under attack and being killed. Can you talk about the situation of journalists in Gaza and the West Bank, and how are their rights and freedoms being infringed by the continued attacks by Israel?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's difficult to follow after Hind's powerful testimony, and thank you, Hind, for sharing this, not just now, but regularly, for being our eyes and ears and our witnesses. As she put it firsthand, this is what we hear from a lot of other journalists. The most important thing to highlight is the crime against the press that is continuing, that has been going on for 18 months, for almost 2 years now. And since October 7, the Israeli army has killed nearly 200 reporters in Gaza, according to our information. This is an unprecedented number. It's been said a lot, but it hasn't been said enough. This is an unprecedented number in terms of scale, in terms of time, in terms of location and geography. At Reporters Without Borders, we defend the right to information. We defend journalists. Usually when a journalist is killed, this is our priority. We stop everything to know who killed the journalist, how the journalist was killed, why and how, and to do all the procedure to ensure justice and to combat impunity for this crime. For the past months, we've been having this every day at an overwhelming scale. Today, even before joining this call, we got an alert of yet another journalist in Gaza who was killed by Israeli bombardments. And this weekend, of course, another massacre of reporters across the enclosed enclave. This crime is continuing. It's not stopping, and we refuse to normalize with it. We refuse to say that this is the new normal. We refuse to say that violence of any kind against reporters is normal, be it the assassination and killing and targeting of reporters, or be it the forced displacement of journalists, or the injury, before I go to forced displacement, the injury of journalists, their forced displacement, the targeting of their equipment, their cameras, their microphones, their lights. All of these we've been witnessing too. There have also been targeted strikes against newsrooms. Almost all newsrooms in Gaza have been touched by airstrikes or destroyed, either totally or partially. There have been open source investigations from afar that show, for example, not by RSF, but by other media outlets and organizations that show, for example, that the server room of the Agence France Presse, AFP agency, was targeted by Israeli tanks. There have been strikes against journalists' family members. Al Jazeera correspondent, the brave Al Jazeera correspondent, chief correspondent Wael al-Dahdouh, is a living testament to the difficult price, the terrible price that journalists have to pay in Gaza, even if they themselves are spared. And we're very happy that he's alive and he's with us and he can bear witness. But he has lost members of his family because of his work, and he's not the only one. Of course, he's just the example I'm giving now. So when we speak about the targeting and such an overwhelming number of journalists by Israeli forces, when we talk about the targeting of newsrooms, when we talk about the forced displacement of journalists from their homes, the targeting of their equipment, the fact that they are not allowed to leave Gaza, even if they need to for medical reasons, and there have been many urgent cases, even the fact that they are not allowed to re-enter Gaza if they are exiled, and this is not a detail in this context. The fact that the international press has not been allowed independent entry into Gaza, except when it's chaperoned by the Israeli army and submitted to censorship, and even then, very few have been able to go in. We cannot separate these elements from one another, and we do not. We are very clear that all of this points towards an intention to impose a media blackout on Gaza, to transform journalism into a deadly profession, and to ban journalists from speaking, to make it impossible for them to speak, even when they do manage to speak, as we see with Hind, and they do so at great personal cost and with a lot of bravery, and we're very lucky that their integrity is questioned. They are submitted to slanderous campaigns, to propaganda, to threats and defamations by the Israeli army itself. Sometimes they are accused of being terrorists. Their entire integrity is put in question, and then that is used in turn to justify any attack or any assassination. And obviously these accusations have no link to reality. We look at them at RSF. It's our job. We look at everyone, but the point sometimes is to create so many that it also becomes overwhelming. But unfortunately, there's another objective to that. It's that when this slander is put out there, when journalists are accused, even without proof of anything, that kind of dissimulates itself in the global discourse. And we can speak about the global coverage of Gaza later, but I want to speak even about the best people with the best of intentions. They will have to deal with these slanders. They will become the conversation. When we wake up to the images of a journalist burning alive in Gaza, the question is not how do we stop this massacre. The question that we get, unfortunately, are, well, how do we know he's a journalist? And this is how the conversation itself becomes different. And this is part of that media blackout. This is part of the impunity that allows this crime to continue. Sometimes the Israeli army denies targeting journalists. Sometimes it doesn't deny and it says, yes, we did, but we targeted them because they're also terrorists, because they belong to Hamas, because they will give a list of reasons. And all of them are unacceptable and deemed insufficient by Reporters Without Borders. There is no license to kill journalists. There is no justification at all to harm or kill journalists, especially in this context. One last thing I want to say is that if we look at that context, if we look at genocide and ethnic cleansing and forced displacement and mass massacres, the question of why are journalists being targeted, given that these journalists are the witnesses who are able to tell us about what's happening on the ground, the question answers itself. It becomes clear why these journalists' voices are silent, and the reason to defend them becomes clearer. Attacks on journalists in Gaza are attacks on journalists in Gaza. They are attacks on Palestinians. There are attacks against the press everywhere in the world, but also importantly, there are attacks against our right to know. The public everywhere in the world, across the map, across the entire map, the public has the right to free, independent, pluralistic information. And every time a journalist is killed, this right is under fire. And without this right, the right to know, the right to have information, our democracies are in danger. Our freedoms are in danger. Our ability to gauge and measure all the other freedoms are in danger. And this is why what's happening is so grave. This is why we're speaking about journalists now. It's not because they're more important than other civilians. It's not because other civilians don't matter. It's because without the journalists, we cannot know what else is happening. So thank you to all these journalists for their courage. And at RSF, we're mobilized to defend them to the very end and to seek justice for those who have been killed. We've already submitted 4 complaints to the International Criminal Court. We're going to continue. This is just the legal avenue, but we do everything we can on all the other fronts. We're pushing all the levers, but unfortunately, this massacre is continuing.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for the work that RSF is doing to bring justice for those journalists. Mark, I would like to go to you because I know you work on research around disinformation and political repression. I tend to share with people that disinformation is not necessarily just the spread of fake news, but the lack of access to truthful information, be it because of repression, right, like against journalists, be it because of censorship, or because of surveillance that forces people to self-censor themselves and not speak up. Could you share a bit about how in a crisis like this, where telecommunication infrastructure is destroyed, journalists are under attack, and it's really hard to get truthful information out, how in this scenario contributes to the dissemination of disinformation about what's going on in Gaza?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's really great to be on this panel, which I think is so important. I mean, I always like to emphasize that information is our thought diet, right? We think what we know. And when it comes to the right to know, we have to bear in mind that, disinformation itself is a human rights issue, because the spread of disinformation can cause harm to a range of human rights and others. But also, if we're consuming certain types of information, there's only a limited amount we can consume, so we don't consume others, right? So if we're not exposed to good or truthful information and only disinformation, there's a limited market of options here. So we have to bear that in mind. And as Jonathan was saying, and as many of us know now, not only are journalists being killed and targeted in Gaza in a scale that is almost unprecedented, this killing of witnesses leaves a vacuum, right? A vacuum of information that is then filled by disinformation and strategies of disinformation. And I argue that when we look in particular at the genocide in Gaza, we've got to a point now where I would argue disinformation isn't an appropriate enough term to describe the level of deceit and manipulation that's going on. In fact, and it's not just me being provocative, I used the term alethicide in a recent paper, and alethos being truth and side killing, because we're seeing a killing of truth. And just to mention that a bit, I mean, we've seen attacks on journalists, people who are witnesses. We've seen attacks on universities, which is a type of epistemicide. We've seen attacks on scholars, scholasticide. We've seen the destruction of houses, domicide. I mean, what's going on now in Gaza is basically forcing us to come up with new terminologies to describe the extent to which the egregiousness of this violence is there, and truth is the same. And so this is why I use this term like of eliticide to be there. And we have to bear in mind, right? We have the competing forces of censorship and information. Of course, the Israeli authorities don't want us to see what's going on in Gaza, because they know the more people see what the Israeli army are doing, the more likely they have sympathy with Palestinians. But it's not enough to just censor. You have to provide that alternative narrative. And the narrative that they're providing is one that is dehumanizing Palestinians in order to legitimize their killing. That's what this disinformation is doing, and it's propaganda. And we need a different term, which is one of the words I use, eliticide, to describe the nature of falsehoods that are used to justify genocide, right? So what we're seeing now is a systematic effort to actually provide this alternative narrative, and a systemic effort. And what I mean by that is lies that are well-resourced, spread at the highest levels of government to demonize and dehumanize Palestinians. Now, many of us are familiar with these. One of the most obvious examples is soon after October the 7th, there was this narrative that Hamas beheaded 40 babies, and this was propagated across many media channels, but it was also propagated by Joe Biden and other world leaders. An example that shows this high level disinformation being fed into the public sphere. And what we have to bear in mind, it's not just that there's a lack of information coming out of Gaza. We still see a lot from social media. It's that when disinformation isn't just a random falsehood goes out. In order for disinformation to be effective, it needs to be amplified by key figures, right? And what we're seeing about Israeli lies hold a special place in the kind of many Western media outlets. I don't want to generalize, but also politicians, right? Netanyahu was able to come to Congress and repeat these lies about beheaded babies. We saw Biden amplify it. Palestinian narratives don't get that kind of reach. So we're seeing an actual indulging of disinformation by powerful entities and institutions in the West that is really compromising people's right to know what's really going on in Gaza. And I think that's a really important thing. And what's also curious about this, the reason I think we need to be particularly mindful, this disinformation is not accidental. I mean, one of the most interesting investigations that I did was an investigation into a network of fake accounts, fake websites, and fake bot accounts that were essentially trying to smear and spread disinformation about UNRWA. Now, obviously, UNRWA is one of the organizations that essentially enables the life chance of Palestinians delivering aid, and it's been this, the victim of a smear campaign. But this campaign that was used on Facebook, Threads, YouTube, right? It used all these platforms by Silicon Valley companies to lie about UNRWA, was funded by the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs through a Tel Aviv-based PR company, right? So we're seeing the Israeli government directly manufacturing these network of fake accounts and bot accounts to try and influence audiences in Europe and the global north to essentially buy up propaganda. There's a massive investment into this disinformation, and it's not just accidental, and it's being amplified and reinforced by important political figures. And just as one important comparison, people might ask what we can do, but I know the comparison is common, but when Russia reinvaded Ukraine, the EU, for example, mobilized this notion that war, propaganda for war, as defined in the ICCPR, is illegal. And they use this, for example, to close down official Russia state news outlets. Meanwhile, Israeli news outlets and Israeli official accounts, diplomacies, have been some of the biggest spreaders of this disinformation. So it's being allowed to happen. So the information place is, not only we're not getting good information from Gaza, we are from many journalists, but the Israel are trying to stop it. But the information space that people have access to is being deliberately polluted with little done to stop that.
Thank you so much, Mark. Diana, I wanted to bring you last because I believe the perspective you bring is very important. Could you share your analysis on the effects of what is going on right now regarding access to information and its impact to the future?
Yes, certainly. First, I wanted to say thank you to my fellow co-panelists and, of course, to the organizers. And I especially want to thank Hind Khudari for being tireless in her reporting and bringing light to the world about precisely what is happening in Gaza, enduring incredible amounts of pain as she has witnessed more than 220 of her colleagues being massacred in Gaza, with always a target on her head as well. So I do want to make sure that we acknowledge the sacrifice that she has made and the work that she has done and the contribution that she has made over the course of the past 19, getting close to 20 months, close to 600 days, unfortunately. In terms of what I would like to focus on, I think when we think about the right to information, we think about things in terms of the present. And it's important to think about the present because the present is what keeps you alive. It's, as Hind was already mentioning, it's the information that you need to know in order to be able to know where the civil defense is. It's the information that you need to know where people are being told to flee. It's the information that you need to be able to know where your loved ones are, etc. It's also the information that we need to know so that those of us who are outside can share the information about what precisely Israel is doing in this genocide. But it's also important to step back and analyze the right to information from a past perspective as well as a future perspective. And what I wanted to do in my remarks is look at it from those two perspectives as well. It's important to make the connection between what Israel is doing now in Gaza, this genocide that Israel is perpetrating in Gaza right now, and what Israel did in 1948. These are the exact same. This is a continuation of the process. It's just different forms and different mechanisms. In other words, the way that Israel created the state of Israel, the way that it ethnically cleansed Palestine, was through a combination of massacres, as well as fear, as well as active expulsion. And the records that we have on those massacres, that expulsion and so on, are documented both in the Israeli archives, as well as in Palestinian sources, and in particular through our own oral history and so on. But what we've seen is that over the course of the past 20 years, that for the first 50 years, Israel had closed off those archives. And that what the Israelis have done since is that they're now again shutting down the archives, primarily because they don't want people to know precisely what it was that was done in 1948. In other words, we still don't know everything that happened during the Nakba. And I'm not sure we ever will know everything that happened during the Nakba. Why is this important? Because I want us to now think to the future and fast forward 25, 30 years from now, and to be able to analyze what Israel is doing today with this genocide that they are perpetrating. And what we see is that because of the right to know, and because Israel has curtailed that right to know, it's really doubtful whether we will be able to get the full and complete picture of everything that Israel has done, even in the time where we see that this is a genocide that is being broadcast live and telecast live, as everybody tells us. I say this because of a number of factors. First and foremost, a lot of what we are seeing is information that is being uploaded to digital platforms. And these digital platforms are corporate platforms. These are owned by people. These are owned by corporations. And through a simple click, we can see that entire accounts are deleted. And with the deletion of these entire accounts, the deletion of so many of the videos, of the pictures, the images, the accounts that we are currently living through. Another thing that we see, and that we've been seeing a lot, is that in the attempt to try to get information out to the world, we play this game in which we are trying to go around the algorithm, because the algorithm has gotten so smart in terms of figuring out what images should not be shared. It's gotten smart in terms of figuring out what words should not be shared, which posts should be throttled, and so on. And we have become so smart at going around that algorithm that we create little words or workarounds. For example, Israel with ISR and then ampersand in place of the A. Or we will see the term genocide with an X through it. Or sometimes we'll see the word Israel also crossed out, so that the algorithm cannot easily pick up this information. The result of it is that in current time, we might actually have access to the information in terms of what is happening now. But what about in 25 years from now or 30 years from now, when people are researching precisely what Israel had done in a particular area? How is it that we're going to be able to go back in time to find these social media posts that are out there when we can't even figure out what the workarounds are? Do we know that, for example, Israel should be written with an ISR ampersand EL? Is that something that we will even know? Will we be able to search for that information where we see the word Israel crossed out or the word genocide X'd out? All of this is information that, while in the present is very important, it's also important in the future, particularly as we look towards holding Israel accountable and holding all of these other countries accountable as well for continuing to fund Israel's genocide. And so when we think about the right to know, I encourage us not only to think about what it is that we are living in the current day, but to be thinking about how it is that this information is going to be shared, known, researchable, and be used in the future. And I'm not just talking about in a month's time or 2 months' time, but in a much more distant future where this information actually matters. And what I want to conclude is by looking at the ways in which the Israeli side has managed to get through its messaging throughout this entire period. One thing that we've seen is that even on this panel, we've repeated some of the Israeli tropes that came out, some of the disinformation that came out at the very start of Israel's attack on Gaza. And it's because there hasn't been the same level of filtering, the same level of throttling, the same level of crushing, that we still see 19 months, close to 20 months into the genocide, the repeating, and I know you don't mean it, Mark. I know you're meaning it as an example, and I'm just using it as an example. We see the repeating of these same messaging lines, whereas we don't see the same repeating of what is actually happening in Palestine because of these attempts to crush and to throttle. And so as a way forward, I would encourage us to be thinking of ways that we should be saving all of this information, saving these videos, documenting, categorizing, and so on in ways that can't easily be crushed, in ways where it can't actually be shut down by a corporation, in ways in which accounts cannot be just wholly deleted and therefore all the information gone, and that we be thinking of preserving this information not only for the current day, but for the future as well. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. I think we are indeed, right, in a narrative war as well. And it is extremely important what you're saying about initiatives to archive the information that is accessible today, right? Like, because not all of it is accessible. I wonder if Mark or any other panelists would like to talk a little bit about current efforts on this front, on if you know of any projects that are working on archiving and documenting the current information for prosperity, right? Like for the future, if you would like to talk a little bit so the audience knows about those projects and maybe they can contribute.
Sure. I mean, I know there's a couple. I can't remember all the names. I have a colleague in Canada, Alexi Abrams, who's downloaded as many a comprehensive archive of Instagram videos produced from Gaza. So these obviously are not going to be stored on Instagram. They're going to be downloaded offline. Even yesterday, someone on Twitter who I don't believe belonged to a formal organization had archived all videos that had been produced by Gaza-based journalists. So there are projects underway to start to document these archives. And that's just Instagram videos, right? So that's just one particular aspect of it. And there's other projects documenting specific evidence of war crimes, so more selective. But this kind of fire hose of information is there. And I think that's great. It's really important. I totally agree with Diana that we need these archives. My concern, of course, is that unfortunately, one of the aspects of the information war is that factual, accurate information is in this sort of quote unquote, I don't like the term post-truth world, not always sufficient in trying to convince people. It can be used as evidence, which is vital. But in the sort of war narratives where we need more and more people to be putting pressures, particularly on the US government and European governments, to remove support for Israel and its genocide, unfortunately, rational debate, rational evidence isn't always the best way of actually trying to convince people of that. So whilst the evidence is absolutely important, we need that regardless. It's not a silver bullet in trying to convince people of the moral rightness here, right? And this is the part of the deliberate communication strategy that Israel in particular have been using, is being, through demonizing propaganda, you create this polarization where confirmation bias exists and people only believe what they want to believe or what they believed before or what certain people tell them to believe. And so this is my concern here, is that we need archives, but we need some level of intervention in which people are taken out of these echo chambers and these silos before we can even have a chance of exposing them to this kind of important archival information. So that's just my point. I want to say on that. I don't want to take too much time.
Thank you, Mark. Jonathan, maybe you can talk a little bit about, since I'm taking the last thing that Mark said, right, like some way of intervention. You mentioned RSF work on trying to bring justice for the journalists who have the rights, right, like being attacked or who have been murdered by the Israeli forces. Can you share a little bit about the attempts of bringing this justice for the people, the journalists and bloggers and media folks trying to document information and the rights being violated?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much to my co-panelists for everything you said, and to you, Isabella. So just an important reminder that, first of all, according to international law, journalists are considered civilians. And second of all, that the targeting of civilians and of journalists is a war crime. The targeting of civilian infrastructure, therefore journalist infrastructure, is considered a war crime according to the Geneva Conventions. And it is in this regard that RSF has already submitted 4 complaints to the International Criminal Court. In these 4 complaints, the reason there are 4 complaints and not 1 is because the crime, as we said, it's continuing. The first one, we submitted it in November 2023. The second one was in December. The third, if I'm not mistaken, it was in March, and another one in late 2024. And we're currently compiling more complaints. Those complaints, what we do is we're asking the court to investigate these crimes against not the 200, because like I said, the last one was submitted back last year, but when we submit this new one, we're basically asking the court to look at all of these crimes, to investigate all of them. We highlight the fact that there is no independent access into Gaza today, so it's very difficult for us to get evidence. When we speak about evidence, we're speaking in a legal context. That means evidence that can prove beyond reasonable doubt intentional targeting of civilians or of reporters, in our case, reporters. And so this requires forensic evidence, this requires access to the territory, access to witnesses. Even journalists who are in Gaza today, as Hind said, they are dealing with the threat of being killed, the limited equipment that they have. They barely have any battery on their phones or cameras. They can only recharge near hospitals. They can't send a lot of information or transmit even information within Gaza because of destruction of telecom infrastructure, intentional cuts of internet and electricity. Sometimes even just turning on a spotlight of a camera in order to film can expose them to surveillance drones and threaten their lives. And so in light of this difficulty of accessing evidence and having information, it becomes important to compile the information we do have, the elements we do have. And this is where RSF comes in. This is why we speak to journalists, we get evidence, we get testimonies, we get proof. We look at whether the journalists were working, if they were wearing press vests and helmets, that means they were identifiable as journalists. We look at if they were carrying their equipment. We try to find witnesses who were around the journalists who were targeted and killed. For example, we went to Doha to meet with Wa'el, who told us about the targeting and killing of his colleague Samer Abu Daqqa in a drone strike that also injured Wa'el. For example, this is an important testimony for us because it holds in front of a court in that sense. And it shows intentional targeting of an identifiable journalist who was holding his camera. I'm referring to Samer Abu Daqqa, who was killed in December 2023. And we compile all of this information to the court, and we ask the general prosecutor to investigate these crimes, to investigate them for war crimes. We say that we strongly suspect war crimes. What I would like to say is that among these 200 journalists, almost the vast majority were killed in their homes with their families. For 44 of these 200 cases, RSF was able to compile elements and evidence that shows strong evidence of targeting. Not to dismiss the hypothetical of targeting in the other cases, but here, as I said, we are speaking about legal terms. 44 cases of targeting, that means journalists who were identifiable, journalists who were killed by sniper or drones, which are precision weapons, journalists who had just walked into their bedrooms, for example, and a drone strike attacked their bedroom, journalists who were killed after having received threats. Sometimes the Israeli army itself acknowledges targeting the journalists, obviously, as I said before, accusing them, smearing them, justifying, but still, it's an acknowledgement of the targeting. As with the case, for example, I want to give an example, but like Mustafa Suraya and Hamza Dahdouh were killed by a drone strike on their car in January 2023. A third journalist was with them in the car and he survived, but he was injured. And then the Israeli forces said that there were conflicting reports, but one of the reports said they were operating a military drone. Another said there were, quote, terrorists in the car. We knew they were journalists. We knew they were working. We knew they were identifiable. And then the Washington Post obtained the drone, published the footage from the drone online, and it's very clear that the drone was doing journalistic work. It was filming people picking up debris, and the journalists were journalists. No surprise there at all, and they were killed as journalists. So this is just an example of the elements that we compile and that we put in these complaints and we send to the court. Some good news in all of this deluge of bad news is that almost a year ago, we got word back from the prosecutor's office that these complaints have started an investigation for crimes committed against journalists. We saw the arrest warrants against members of the Israeli government last year, including Netanyahu, and those were not related to our complaints. So those were not related to the crimes against journalists. We hope that we will see other arrest warrants because of the crimes committed against journalists. But I'm mentioning this to say that we saw the contempt for international law by world leaders. We're seeing the pressures being exercised on an international court, on the prosecution of that court. We're seeing the sanctions. We're seeing the threats. We're seeing how the Hungarian president even welcomed Netanyahu in Europe and then announced stepping out of the Rome Statute and therefore of the mandate of the International Court. And that just shows where the priority is, unfortunately, today in the world. It shows this contempt for international law and therefore for human rights, for the right to inform, for the right to information, everything we're talking about. But I think, and I'm not just speaking about RSF, I'm speaking about RSF and all of us here and all of us listening. I think we can safely say we're more stubborn than them. We don't have their means, we don't have their power, we don't have their leverage, unfortunately, but we're very stubborn. We have time on our side, and and I'm sure that we're gonna keep. We're still pushing for justice for Shireen Abu Akleh. We supported the complaint with Al Jazeera, and this is still our main priority today. With all the journalists who have been killed since then, this is still our priority. We've worked on other cases. We don't give up on these cases. Sooner or later, I just want to end on that little bit of hope, because it kind of gives meaning to everything we're talking about here, and I believe it personally.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Diana, we have a question from the audience. They are asking, to what extent do you think the UN is doing this archiving of the information? Do you know of any initiatives from the UN caring about the right to know and trying to do this work of documenting the information coming out from Gaza?
I don't have any information in terms of whether they are documenting or not documenting, and so I can't answer the question. I do think that nonetheless we have to start doing our own documenting of everything. One of the things that I wanted to mention in my remarks were two things. First is that if you, for example, type in any of the various Israelis, they call it campaigns, operations, you will get a whole host of hits back about how it is that the Israelis are behaving and so on. And in that documentation, what you won't see is all of the stuff that we have been seeing. You won't be seeing any of the egregious videos of these soldiers who are blowing up schools and dedicating it to their children, or the soldiers who are going in and destroying Palestinian homes, and just before that doing a save the date in the house. You won't see them how they casually are lighting cigarettes and then blowing up a university. I mean, all this stuff is stuff that you won't see when you type in the Israeli words for any of the various operations. You'll see quite the opposite. That it's very carefully crafted, is very carefully curated for the viewer. On the other hand, if you type in anything that is in Arabic, or any of the words that I was mentioning, such as Israel or genocide or any of these sorts of things, that is the type of information that is constantly being throttled or being crushed. And when we use the term social media, I think that that's an incorrect term. It's kind of anti-social media, because it's the media that you want to follow. It's not necessarily, there isn't necessarily a way for it to break through. This is all to say that I think we really need to start doing this documentation ourselves, irrespective of whether the UN is doing it. And I don't have any information about that. And one last thing I do want to say, which picks up on Jonathan's point as well as Mark's point, is that Israel has been deliberate in not allowing foreign journalists in. And the reason that it has been deliberate in not allowing foreign journalists in is because they want to create a scenario where we are questioning the authenticity of and the work of Palestinian journalists. And we are questioning whether they can actually be covering their own, whether they can be covering this genocide. And I think that we also really need to push back against that as well, because if anything, Palestinian journalists have been proven to be the best of journalism, particularly in this time where they are risking their own lives in order to make sure that the world is knowing exactly what it is that is happening. And the level to which I've seen Palestinian journalists not put out stories because they're not 100% sure of their accuracy is something that I don't think there's anything that we can compare to. This is all to say that when we're talking about the right to know is not only the question of the present, it also goes back to, as I said, the past, it also goes to the future, and it also goes to who is actually telling and passing on that knowledge. And I think that we have to really be pushing back against this idea that Palestinian journalists are somehow not journalists, when in fact they are, and 220 of them have been killed targeted deliberately over the course of this genocide because they don't want the truth, because Israel doesn't want the truth to be known.
Thank you so much, Diana. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, so we're going to have to end here. But I would like to thank Mark, Jonathan, and Diana. Thank you for your participation, for the work that you're doing. And of course, thank Hindi again for the video and the brave work that she does in Gaza. And thank Pdaf for the panel as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
إيزابيلا فرنانديز، نشكرك على إدارة هذه الجلسة ونشكر جميع المتحدثين. وقبل أن نستمع إلى المتحدثة التالية، نود أن نغتنم هذه اللحظة لنتوجه باسم حملة وباسم جميع المشاركين بخالص الشكر والتقدير للعاملين في قطاع التكنولوجيا الذين خاطروا بوظائفهم وتعرضوا لضغوط وخسائر بسبب مواقفهم الجريئة في الوقوف إلى جانب العدالة ورفض الإسكات. إن التحدث من داخل هذه الشركات الكبرى ضد تواطؤها يتطلب شجاعة حقيقية، ومعنا اليوم قصة حية عن هذا الموقف الشجاع مع المهندسة السابقة في شركة مايكروسوفت ابتهال أبو السعد التي تم فصلها من عملها بعد أن دافعت علنا عن فلسطين وانتقدت ممارسات شركتها. أهلا بك ابتهال ونشكرك على حضورك وصوتك.
Thank you to our speakers for that session. Before our next guest, we want to take the opportunity to extend our thanks and appreciation from Hamle and our participants to the tech workers who have put themselves at risk of losing their jobs and faced hardship for speaking out and choosing justice over silence. Speaking out against the complicity of big tech companies from within takes courage. And here with us today is one such story. Ibtihal Abu Sa'ad, a former Microsoft software engineer who was fired for calling out Microsoft and defending Palestinians' rights. Welcome, Ibtihal.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for hosting me today. And I'm here just to share some words about this aspect of big tech's current complicity in the oppression against Palestinians, and also where we are at in this movement, and just to show that we have momentum and we have the upper hand currently. So to begin, I just want to debunk this notion we have that, you know, the real weapons that are doing the harm in Palestine are the physical weapons only, like the bombs that are being sent by different countries, the drones, all the things that we can tangibly see are doing the harm. And I would like to challenge that and just clarify that these tech weapons, as we call them, these cloud and AI weapons that all these big tech companies, whether it be Microsoft, Google, Amazon, others, are providing to the Israeli military and government, are allowing this ongoing genocide to be at the scale at which it is, and they're enabling a level of destruction and efficiency from the military that frankly would not be possible with just the physical weapons. And so when we talk about raising our voices against these companies, when we talk about speaking out, it's not out of, you know, the goodness of our hearts or as this side issue that we're trying to mitigate. It's because they are actively and very heavily involved in the oppression against our beloved Palestinians. And so for me, the decision to speak up, even though, you know, I knew there might be consequences given the level of corruption and complicity at the company, of losing my job. To me, it was parallel to if I worked somewhere that was shipping the bombs that to Israel, would I not say something? Would I not try to come in the way? It is not to me an act of courage or kindness or bravery. It is a bare minimum if we are at these corporations that are really amplifying and increasing the harm in Gaza. And the thing I'd like to focus on today is, as I mentioned, we are in a moment where they're scared. These companies are starting to realize that more and more people of conscience are refusing to just stay silent, are refusing to just work for them or buy their products without any resistance, for as long as they continue to empower this genocide. And the timing of this session is perfect, because a very clear example of that is just yesterday, 2 more Microsoft employees publicly resigned from the company over its complicity in genocide. One of them even interrupting the CEO, Satya, at Microsoft's largest conference, which is Build, and asking the CEO to, instead of demoing his cool, flashy, you know, whitewashed products, to demo what Microsoft is doing on the ground, is allowing on the ground in Gaza. And so there is a movement. The moment where I protested or Vanya protested was not a moment. It is a start to, we have been seeing over the past 6 weeks more and more people adding Microsoft on social media, telling them they are boycotting. We've been seeing more folks with influential platforms in different industries asking for the boycotts. We've been seeing workers not just at Microsoft, but at different tech companies that, instead of using tech for good, as they always claim in their PR campaigns and their cute little shows, are empowering murder. We've been seeing people speak up. And so I can say, based on more like internal sources and digging, that these companies know they're at the lower position right now, and that the masses that oppose the level of complicity they have is increasing day by day, and it is throwing these companies in crises, because now it's between profit at the expense of the lives of Palestinians, and doing the right thing at the expense of having the whole world turn around you. And so I say that when you see these examples of folks that are speaking up against these tech companies, you do not see them as isolated or exceptional incidents, but just as something, just as us, as human beings, as masses that oppose this oppression, using the power of our numbers to try to make a change in these industries. Because again, they really are enabling this genocide to reach unprecedented levels. And so I would just like to say also that this whole tech worker movement, and myself and Vanya, we stand on the shoulders of so many industries and so many worker movements that have also been trying to change things from within. And we all, internationally, we all come together with a single purpose, which this should not be something that is it should not be debated whether it's okay to sacrifice your job for a topic like this, because no sacrifice we make, whether it be our jobs, any risks on us here in the West from publicly being advocates for the cause, none of these can equate 0.001% or like a milligram of the sacrifices that our people in Palestine are making due to these complicit companies. And so I would just like to remind us and ground us that really nothing we do and no risks we take, no sacrifices we make are even scratching the surface of the responsibility we have in advocating for this justice.
شوية صور وشوية أخبار من بلدي، كومة هدايا حلوة ملفوفة بذكريات، نصيحة من أبوي ودعوة